one of the biggest changes I saw really over the last 10 years or so really was the advent of big data and the integration and use of big data alongside the use of primary market research, whether they be panels or surveys. I guess a large part of that really was afforded by the move from analog to digital. The benefit of digital being that in many ways, there is this footprint that wasn't there in the analog world. And alongside that, obviously, a lot of my role was spent really looking around audience measurement, media expenditure. So it was looking at some of the challenges afforded by that switch from analog to digital. So overcoming some of the challenges around the way that television changed its distribution, the way that media increasingly went online. So how do we go about that? Well, those would be the big changes. And that consumed an awful lot of my time and my colleagues and my clients' time. So I think the interesting thing is on the buy side, and by that I guess I mean media agencies as well as the advertiser, was really about a heavy orientation around how much should be invested in digital versus television, for example. And I think we saw, in particular, advertisers getting frustrated with the lack of progress in respect of measurement in that area. If I look in Europe and to some extent in the US as well, the measurement of digital is still, particularly digital video, is still quite separate from the measurement of what we might call television. And that frustration really hit a point probably about 2 years ago, which resulted in the WFA initiative around cross-media measurement. And then both in the UK through ISBA, which is the representative group of advertisers in the UK, and the ANA in the US, we've seen initiatives driven by the advertisers, to try and bring digital and TV together. On the sales side of the business, so looking at media vendors, media owners, the challenge for them has been largely around looking at how do they get credit for and drive audiences to the new ways of distributing, in particular, video and television style video, whether you call it streaming or VOD. And again, the focus there from an audience perspective is getting credit for all of that audience. So as a measurement company, my job was to try and put that together and create a combined audience. But everything I've described there really is looking at it from an audience measurement lens. But the other way to look at investment and how to determine how much to invest is to look at where spend is moving. And again, the way in which we measure spend and advertising activity is also changing quite radically. In the past, if you think about an analog world where we had physical magazines and newspapers, it was simple to pick up the book, go through the book, scan the ads, that's an ad, scan those ads, match it to a rate card, and you had an estimate of spend and you had a coverage of activity that went on. And in essence, it was a census. So you could do in effect a census of those magazines and newspapers. If we think about it with digital, of course, it's all changed. Suddenly, the ad content may be different in the digital format. It's bought and sold in a different way. You have programmatic, you have new digital channels, and that put a lot of stress into the methodologies around that media monitoring and ad monitoring capability. Now think about it in terms of television. In terms of television, if I take the US paradigm, what I would in effect do is to put a monitoring station in each DMA across the United States, and I'd be able to track all the ads that were running through those networks and through that distribution in each of those DMAs. Now, of course, with the advent of streaming, with the advent of addressable TV, suddenly I could be living in the same DMA as you. I could even be living next door to you or to my neighbor and receive completely different advertising. And again, that begins to put real pressure back onto the measurement systems from an ad point of view. So how have the methodologies adapted? Well, the bulk of the methodologies, if we just think about it from a digital point of view, if you look at the way in which the majority of the digital measurement is being measured now for ad spend, it's increasingly sample based. So whether you use a spider technology or you even recruit a panel, which one of the digital providers does, the challenge there is that when you take that out to an advertiser or you take it to a client, that often they're expecting the same level of granularity and detail as they got from the census model, from the analog world. So quite often the conversation would spill into, yeah, that's great, Andy, but you've missed this ad, you've missed this ad, and you've missed this ad. It's a sample. If you then took it further forward and started to look at how do you then calculate spend from that, what we then did was, in essence, to take audience estimates and match audience estimates to the ad occurrence in order to try and set a spend calculation or an evaluation of how much was being spent on those digital ads. So again, it became more complex. Throw in programmatic, where throw in more biddable media, and suddenly some of those methodologies got very, very stretched. Now, what I think is interesting is when I look at a company like SMI is coming at it from a completely different angle. So they're coming at it from the buy side, looking at it from what's actually being bought by the agencies, and then categorizing that. And they're able to get into that level of detail in terms of what's being spent where across these new channels by category. And then even taking that further, they're also investing in pricing solutions, which give us not just understanding of where money is being spent, the level of demand set against some of these new channels, whether that be digital or addressable TV, but also some idea of pricing and relative value of those channels. So I think it's a very interesting way of moving forward, and I think shows real promise. I think some of the things I talked about in terms of spend and activity are fundamentals to the way in which we make decisions around how monies are allocated, either on the buy or the sell side, for that matter. But in addition to that, I think you're also seeing more interest in outcomes, looking at attribution. Again, attribution is being used much more widely now, particularly on the sell side. So you have a lot of the TV networks engaging with TV attribution and selling their inventory with a sometimes a guarantee against an outcome, something that we wouldn't have seen 10 or 15 years ago. Another area, again, that's seeing a lot of interest is this thing around the attention economy. So, how much attention is the consumer paying to my medium? And perhaps even more importantly, how much attention are they paying to the ads that are being distributed through my media channel? And again, I think it's creating a much more holistic view rather than simple head counting and reach and frequency. So I think those are the kind of initiatives that I see coming to the fore over the next few years.
Andy, so tell us sort of the relevance of currency-based measurements around media pricing, and historically what it's been and what the opportunities are now.
Yeah, I think the challenge, for companies who are doing advertising monitoring, whether that be occurrence and or expenditure, is that sometimes it's the poor relation. I think sometimes all of the focus when we look at how to make decisions across media, gets put, onto the audience measurement solution. And clearly that's really, really important. But so too is the actual levels of expenditure that are being set against different channels. I think sometimes they don't get the full credit. I think sometimes they're seen as the poor relation in those relativities, perhaps with audience measurement. And I think if anything, the challenges around this require, good thinking, investment, and I think companies like SMI are really coming at it with a different perspective, and will help to elevate hopefully elevate the whole ad monitoring business and raise its consciousness, or raise the consciousness in the minds of both the buy and the sell side of media.